never fails to surprise me the number of people, including some gardeners, who look upon the garden in Windsor as a no-go area, a place where there's no colour, no life, no interest. How wrong they are. Even on a dull day like today, the winter garden is full of potential. For a start, you get deciduous trees and shrubs. Their leaves shed exhibit interesting patterns of growth, branches, and barks too. You get beautiful groove barks, coloured barks, and some trees and shrubs have colourful twigs in winter. And then there are the flowers, winter flowers, few in number compared with those in spring and summer, but welcome and valuable for all that. Evergreens of a wide range, conifers, varying shades of green, blue, silver, grey, as well as variegations and golds and silvers. And then there are fruits, winter fruits. Not all fruits are limited to the autumn months. There are some trees and shrubs whose fruits go right through to Christmas and beyond, despite the attentions of birds and frost. One of them is this Chinese mountain ash, Sorbus hupiensis. Very distinct species with the white, pearly white fruits on these contrasting red stalks.
Sorbus hupiensis is one of many species that have been introduced to the Royal Gardens at the southwestern end of the Great Park at Windsor. The design and planting here, as well as the maintenance, are of an exceptional standard. In garden terms, though, they are comparatively recent.
On this site, some 60 years ago, there's a small estate nursery growing trees for the Great Park. These are mainly common, hardy, large growing trees like horse chestnut and London plane. But there are also a few more exotic things. Plants like this rare Chilean evergreen conifer, Podocarpus salignus. And incredible though it may seem, this clump grew from a box of unwanted seedlings that someone dumped in a corner of the nursery. Unwanted. Now it's irreplaceable. It was saved from destruction to become an important feature in an exciting new garden, a garden that was masterminded by a man who came to the estate in 1932 as deputy surveyor. His name was Eric Savill.
The twin gardens, only half a mile apart, are a monument to his vision and landscaping skills. He was encouraged by King George V, and particularly by Queen Mary, who, after a visit to the embryo garden, remarked, "It is very small, Mr. Savill, but very nice." Eric Savill took this as a green light for further developments. After the Second World War, he turned his attention to the high ground above Virginia Water, an artificial lake made in the mid-18th century by William, Duke of Cumberland. The younger son of George II and the butcher of the Scots at Culloden, he had the doubtful honour of having a foul-smelling native herb, the hedge woundwort, or stinking woolly, named after him. Beside Virginia Water in 1947, Eric Savill began transforming 300 acres of wilderness into a woodland garden on a grand scale.
This is one of the most popular and most colourful of all the mountain ash. It's called Sorbus Joseph Rock. Now these berries start off a very pale yellow in autumn and gradually deepen in colour as the winter advances. I won't say they are exactly bird-proof, but certainly the birds tend to leave these until the very last, and very often you'll find them actually dying at the other side of the Christmas, still on the branches. It also has a very good autumn colour. And the name commemorates an extraordinary character. He was an American, though Austrian by birth, Joseph Rock, who spent most of his time in Western China. He collected a whole range of interesting plants. Some of them you can see in gardens. There are various rhododendrons, for instance, but this Sorbus is probably the one that best commemorates him.
And it really is a fine tree for the medium-sized or large garden. Red-berried mountain ash, lovely though they are often plundered by hungry birds. Right next to the Great Park polo ground, fieldfares and redwings make free with the berries. Squabbling starlings will take many beakfuls too. After a couple of days, all that remains is a halo of fallen fruit, discarded for lesser fry to finish off. Berries of all sorts brighten the winter garden. This Iris foetidissima capsule shows a mouthful of brilliant seeds. The Latin name refers to the unpleasant smell from the bruised leaves. The English oaks offer refuge for the American grey squirrel, looking out for swollen hips. A juicy morsel full of vitamin C, but the seeds will be spread around by squirrels and birds to grow elsewhere. One berry that doesn't seem to be eaten in any quantity grows on Pinetium mucronata, a low, evergreen, densely branching shrub. It belongs in the heather family and can't stand lime in the soil. While it isn't everyone's favourite, it's certainly one of the most showy of all winter-bearing shrubs. There are many colour forms of Pinetia, from pure white ones, pink and lavender forms, to those with deep red berries. It was first introduced to Britain in 1828 from the Magellan region at the tip of South America. More sparse, but with some strange properties indeed, are the fruits on these branches.
This is one of the most unusual fruiting trees. Its name is Xanthoxylum simulans. Xanthoxylum spelt with a Z, so it's one of the last plants in the alphabet. Unusual because of the thorns, which on the twigs, when they're young, are small and flattened. But as they age, they become swollen and woody. So by the time they're on the main branches, and especially on the trunk, they look like limpets. There's also something reptilian about the stem. It puts me in mind of some of those dinosaurs like Ankylosaurus with lots of bumpy tails. Now, the other unusual part about it concerns the fruits themselves. They're red and small, about the size of peppercorns. But they have a very unusual taste. If you just nibble one between your teeth and let the tip of your tongue touch it, it almost paralyzes the tip of your tongue. You've got to spit it out, throw it away. Don't swallow it, whatever you do. Now, this is a Chinese tree, but there's an American version, which is called the toothache tree, because the Indians in some of the native regions where this tree grows used to chew this to alleviate toothache.
Do be careful, though, and warn children not to eat berries from garden ornamentals.
For a variety of winter effects, there are a few trees that can beat this one, the hybrid strawberry tree, Arbutus andrachnoides. One of its parents is the common or Killarney strawberry tree, which is autumn flowering and produces its red strawberry-like fruits at the same time. There's a plant over there, and there's just a few fruits remaining. The birds have had a really good go at it. But this one, the hybrid one, has these distinct polished evergreen leaves. Its flowers are now early winter, pitcher-shaped, white in bunches, and as a bonus, it has a lovely, rich-coloured bark.
Because the fruits of the strawberry tree are gritty and tasteless, you could say that its bark is better than its bite, especially after rain has made the branches shine like polished furniture. And winter is, without doubt, the best time to enjoy the glow from a whole range of tree barks.
This is one of my favourite trees, Prunus cerula, the Tibetan cherry. It's one of the best of its kind, not for its flowers, which are insignificant, nor for its autumn colour, which is virtually non-existent, but for that bark, polished mahogany red. When it gets older, it peels off in long strips, and especially noticeable under the main branches, where it hangs in big bunches. There are two problems associated with this bark. One are these ridges, which you find at intervals all the way up. They produce tiny buds, which if left, will push out shoots and spoil the appearance of the bark. This is very common on young specimens. The thing to do is to rub those away as soon as they begin to appear. There was a very famous gardener called E.A. Bowles, and he had a plant like this in his garden, and he used to encourage visitors to pat and fondle the tree and get a good shine on it. It really is a tree you've got to love, you know, sort of go up and down and smooth it down. Now, the other problem is associated with this green material, algae. And this is especially noticeable in western areas where you get a higher rainfall. Now, this too, you must get rid of. And this same gardener, Bowles, once a year would take out a bucket of warm water and a scrubbing brush, and he would give his tree, the bark, a really good scrubbing and get a really high shine on it. Now, I only wish that everyone felt the same way about the Tibetan cherry, but unfortunately it's not true, because in its native Tibetan valleys, the locals there, they chop it, they use it as firewood. You'll very rarely see a tree of this stature. It's mainly scrubby, bushy, sort of almost coppiced, cutting those branches to burn on the fires.
Besides the cherries, there are other groups of trees that provide attractive bark effects. Not as silvery as our native sort, the river birch from the USA peels back in papery strips to give fresh and light colours each year, especially when the tree is young. More unusual is this tree, again from America, Acer pennsylvanicum, called the moosewood, or more aptly, the snakebark maple. The upper stems of our own Scots pine are a warm reddish colour. It's a good distinguishing feature. On the sandy soils of the valley gardens, they grow well. So does this unusual blackberry, a variety of Rubus biflorus, a Chinese bramble that looks as though it's been dipped in distemper. For spectacular twigs, though, it's hard to beat this dogwood from Siberia, Cornus albasibirica. For those with a fancy for the bizarre, the contorted hazel would do justice to a witch's cottage in a dark, misty wood. The seed heads and dead leaves of last summer's bistorts still provide a warm carpet of colour left over from the autumn. Other leaves stay green all year round, but these aren't true leaves. The butcher's brooms have branchlets that are flattened into leaf-like organs. In Ruscus hypoglossum, see where the tiny flowers are carried in the axil of a small, true leaf halfway along the blade. The Himalayan poppy, Mechanopsis regia, forms a beautiful overwintering rosette. And there are fine rosettes too from a totally different group of plants, the ferns.
One of the most popular of our native ferns in gardens is the soft shield fern, Polysticum sativum, of which this is a variety, and some variety, one of the most desirable of all. It's called Plumosum densum. Densum relates to the habit of the fern. Plumosum, these fronds, which are all feathery, very attractive. Another characteristic of this are these little knobbles, these pale knobbles, along the fronds at the base of the branches. This is a viviparous fern, and each one of those little knobbles is a small fernlet, if you like. You can propagate this plant by laying that frond on the ground, and as long as you have the right conditions, moisture and shade, they'll take root and eventually produce plants like this. It's one of the most interesting facts of British ferns, and that compared with other countries, they're few in number, few species, but they've made up for this by producing a whole range of varieties. And people have collected these over the years. I suppose the peak of collections occurred in the Victorian times, when whole family parties used to go out looking for peculiarities amongst the native ferns, anything that was different. Some of these were bizarre, and some of the names they gave to these ferns were equally bizarre. There was one that was referred to as Polysticum sativum plumosum divisilobum densum erectum. That must be the longest Latin name in gardening history.
Birds' eggs, butterflies, shells, you name it, the Victorians collected it. And the craze in turn spawned a library of books to help in their identification and cultivation. some of the fern volumes are among the loveliest natural history books ever printed. And it wasn't just British ferns that were sought after. From Chile, a species of Blechnum, a distant relative of our hard ferns. Even more primitive than ferns are the mosses. Polytrichum mosses are among the tallest kinds and produce starry carpets and tussocks.
One of our prettiest and most interesting native mosses is this one, Leucobrium glaucum. It's usually found on poor acid soils, on moors and in woods, especially pine, and as here under beech trees. It forms these very gentle hummocks of green pelt-like growths, just like stroking a green mole. And it has a characteristic very similar to the sphagnum moss in that it can soak up water like a sponge. And when conditions are right, moist conditions, it turns this lovely emerald green. In summer, especially during drought periods, these hummocks dry out. And there are tiny hairs at the tips of the leaves which turn white, hence the name white fork moss. It's a very unusual plant also in that if the weather is very dry and there's a wind blowing, these hummocks detach themselves and are blown around as moss balls. When they come to rest and conditions change again, more moisture, they resume their operations, as it were, root again and turn emerald green. Now in Japan, they actually grow moss gardens, they cultivate them using different species, and it's very, very effective, all these different subtle shades of green. But this one, this is a natural moss garden. There's no cultivation here other than clearing the dead leaves of the beech in autumn. And not surprisingly, it's become one of the Savill garden's most impressive features.
These round twiggy bundles high in the branches were cut with a golden sickle by the Druids, and the plant has become part of our Christmas tradition.
Whichever way you look at it, the mistletoe is a strange plant. It's an evergreen shrub. It's only partially parasitic, partially in as much as it has chlorophyll in its leaves and stems, so it can manufacture some of its own food. But it does need a host plant in order to survive. You'll never find it growing on the ground. It's a strange plant in as much as the fruits, the little white fruits, are full of a very sticky juice. And in nature it's spread by birds, mainly thrushes. And they find this sticky juice very difficult to deal with. Very often they'll wipe the beak on the branch and some of the seeds will find their way into the crevices. Or if they swallow the fruit whole, then it finds its way out at the back end, and again the seeds will be in the crevices. The juice, as it ages, hardens. There's no way you get the seed out of the crevice. Once it's settled in, it germinates and it pushes out botanically it's called a hostoria, but it's a kind of a sucker which moves through the bark and taps into the sap layer just under the outer bark. Once it's established, it then puts out roots, and those roots will move different lengths along the stem and then put out shoots, each shoot bearing 2 leaves, and then it branches and another 2 leaves, and you get incrustations, eruptions if you like, of mistletoe along branches. It's interesting as well in that it won't just grow on one tree. It has a whole range of different host plants. This one's on a mountain ash, a sorbus. And when it's really well established, and after many years, it can cover the tree. It almost looks as if you've got a mistletoe tree.
This isn't mistletoe. It's called a witch's broom, and it's the Scots pine's own response to damage caused by insect attack. Cuttings can be taken from the stunted shoots in the broom and propagated to produce a dwarf version of the parent. This is how many dwarf conifers have come about. Others have occurred as sports or chance seedlings, like this variety of Scots pine, Gold Medal, which is at its best at Christmas time.
It might be hard to imagine, but at the time of Jesus' birth, the parent of this little pine was already 2,000 years old. It's one of 2 bristlecomb pines. The other one is called Pinus eristata, has white resin flecks on the needles. This one's Pinus longeva, meaning long-lived. Now this is a young specimen, maybe 8 years from seed. But there are grizzly trees in its native habitat, the White Mountains in California, which are over 4,000 years old. Everyone knows the English holly, Ilex aquifolium. Even those with no special knowledge of plants recognise those thick, evergreen, prickly leaves And of course those sealing wax red berries. But not all holly bushes bear berries. And that's because the flowers of the holly are either male or female, and they're found on separate trees. So in order to get berries on your holly, you need the flowers to be pollinated by a male holly somewhere in the vicinity. Now there's only one wild holly in Britain. It's also found in other parts of Europe. But it's produced over the years hundreds of different varieties. This one's called flavescens, the moonlight holly, so called because the leaves, especially towards the end of winter, become suffused with a pale yellow. But there are others even more spectacular.
The well-named Aurea marginata. For a holly enthusiast, the Valley Gardens are the place to be. The National Collection of Hollies has been established here. They include what must be the most prickly of all, the hedgehog hollies, with spines not only around the margin, but on top of the leaf as well. The hedgehog types are without exception male trees, so they don't produce berries, and it's the berries that most people find attractive about the holly, though they aren't always red. This yellow form of the English holly, Baxiflava, is one of the most reliable. A small-leaved Japanese species, Ilex crenata convexa, has black berries that are difficult to spot. America has its share of species too. Ilex opaca is their equivalent of our English holly. Its leaves lack the luster of our species.
Here's a holly called sparkleberry. Now some might not believe that. For a start, where are the leaves? Well, it's a deciduous holly. There are several of them spread around the world, and this particular one is a hybrid between a Japanese and an American deciduous holly. But if you look at the fruits, okay, they're small, but they're red. If you look at them closely, you'll see they're the same shape, the same form as the common holly.
Red berries abound in December. The Alexandrian laurel was used to garland the victor's head. The stems are long and flexible and can be interwoven. Its Latin name is Dani racemosa. Another species of the butcher's brooms we saw earlier. Berries like sealing wax on our native Ruscus aculeatus. Although winter flowers are few and far between, they are all the more valuable for that. And this one is especially rare, Sarcococca saligna, a member of the box family from Afghanistan.
This must be just about the most distinguished of all hardy winter-flowering evergreens. It's a Mahonia, and it's a hybrid between a tender, late autumn, early winter flowering species called Lamerifolia and a hardy winter flowering one called Japonica, which most people know. Several people have tried to produce a hybrid between these two species, a hardy hybrid, without success. They were using Japonica as a mother parent. And then it happened by accident. A local nursery, Russell's, imported some seedlings, supposedly of Lamerifolia, from an Irish nursery. And so Eric Savill went along to view these, and he picked out a whole batch of them, including several which looked rather different. Now these he planted out here in the Savill Gardens and in the Valley Gardens. As they developed over the years, he knew he was right. They were different. They were hybrids between these two species. And one of them he named Charity. This is the original plant. And it combines the hardiness and the flower scent of Japonica with the vigor and the bold, handsome foliage and those long flower spikes of Lamerifolia. Not surprisingly, it's received both the Award of Merit and the First Class Certificate from the Royal Horticultural Society. It's probably the most significant, one of the loveliest contributions the Savill Gardens have made to British gardens. And it's a fitting memory, if you like, of the garden and the man.